Jai Nitai, Jai Nitai, Nitai. Namashri Nityanandaya Janavi Pataye Namaha. Namah Krishna Surupaya Namam Yanangamanjarim. Vasudha Janavi Kantam Shri Nityanandamishwaram. Anangamanjarim Rupam Avadotam Namamyaham. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. So I want to talk about a subject matter that I was going to get into yesterday, or I tried to get yesterday, but I just ran through it and didn't really talk about it in a way that did it any justice. So what I want to talk about today is my study of the character or the personality Nityananda. So Nityananda, also called Nitai, he is born in 1474 in Ekachakra in Bengal, West Bengal, India. So he was a very, very influential character that has a huge role in the story of Sri Chaitanya. And Sri Chaitanya is something like the second coming of Christ. A lot of people may be waiting for the coming of Christ, but I actually believe that Sri Chaitanya is the second coming of Christ, and that he came to give us a method by which in this age we can actually stay pure and become pure, and a very easy method of atonement, which is the holy name, the names of God. So the name of God is the method that is designated for Kali Yuga. According to the traditions of Vaishnavism, especially in Bengal, there's a high emphasis on Nam Sankirtan and Japa, Harinam Japa. And that's the main practice of my youth of the Hare Krishna tradition. That's Kirtan and personal meditation called Japa on a rosary. And we do this every day to connect directly to God, because in the Vaishnava mystical tradition, we're looking at a non-dual principle. So in a non-dual principle, a name and the object named are actually one and the same thing. So when it comes to God, the name is the most direct way that we can communicate to God. So the Hare Krishna mantra is the method that Sri Chaitanya taught as an easy way to overcome all the struggles of the sinful nature of Kali Yuga, the age that we're in, the epoch that we're in right now. And as we go deeper into the cusp, into what we're at right now, is we're actually on a cusp between the dark, the first real dark part of Kali Yuga, where the actual nature of sin is magnified at a degree which is actually very, very profound. We're on a cusp. From this period, we're going to move into a golden age. It'll be a mini Satya Yuga within the long Kali Yuga that we're in, because you have to understand, Kali Yuga goes on for 432,000 years. We're about 5,000 or 6,000 years in. And there's a lot of time that will happen. And in that, there's going to be cycles, and it'll get dark and it'll get light, and it'll get dark and it'll get light. And there'll be some chance to reunite with God for some time in Kali Yuga, until it gets so dark that at the end of it, things get destroyed. There's another cataclysm and it reboots. The system reboots, Earth reboots. So the idea that I want to try to talk about today is the role of the Avadut Nityananda, and what he actually brings into the fold of the Vaishnava Brahminical tradition, and how he brings in some of the elements, the mystical elements of the Buddhist yogi or Nath yogi tradition. The Shaiva yogi, the Nath yogi, and the Buddhist yogi have a lot in common. And so the term avadut is actually a term that is used most specifically by those traditions. And Nityananda is described as being an avadut, as coming into the fold of Sri Chaitanya's life in the form of a large ascetic with absolutely no fear and a very, very, very deep love for the one pure consciousness. And he plays a supportive role in the life of Sri Chaitanya as guru and as his elder brother. There's some very interesting things that are written in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is the main biography story of Sri Chaitanya's life that people in the Vaishnava tradition refer to understand that we call pastimes, the story of Sri Chaitanya. So Sri Chaitanya is the main way in this age, just like the Christians say Christ is the only way in the light. Similarly, Sri Chaitanya is the only way in the light. And if you actually take the grammar of the structure of both of those words, you're going to see some interesting similarities. Sanskrit's a funny thing because we just pay attention to sounds rather than always grammar. When I look at it just here in Google, its origins are Greek, Krian, which is to anoint, and the Hebrew Messiah, which is Messiah, and then it becomes Christos and Christus and Christ. What the etymology of Chaitanya is, I think that it's really relevant in today's day and age because it literally just refers to consciousness or life. And it has an etymology that I can pull up here. Chaitanya, consciousness, character of the self, spiritual force. So that we talk about, when they talk about the spiritual world, that is a world within consciousness, pure consciousness. So we have from Shaiva philosophy, Chaitanya refers to consciousness, the state of Turyatita, thought above with reference to that of blossoming insight, is simply the further extension of the realization of the state called Turya. But the state of Turyatita was taught there as a state of awareness in which void remain as objectable knowables, but is separated from them, and is the state referred to as the pure self, the formless, and pure consciousness, Shuddha Chaitanya. Siddhantika scriptures, in the Siddhantika scriptures, it is taught with reference to those who know the deity solely as being all transcendent. So some more, if we look at even in Marathi, it means life, spirit, essential mobility or activity, the deity considered as the source of life or the essence of being, intelligence, sentience, percepience. Chaitanya, life, spirit, intelligence, sentience. You understand that? So these mystics, what they're actually trying to really study is consciousness. The study of consciousness is Eastern mysticism. And so when you have a character born to live a life to embody what consciousness is in a very instructive way. So what the Chaitanya Charitamrita seems to do is it seems to show you all the various stages that consciousness exists in, from from atheists who are actually in relationship with themselves, with consciousness in a way that is negating and just they're playing hide and go seek. They're in a certain relationship with themselves that they choose not to acknowledge their innermost being as being actually significant. And then you have the faithful, those who have shraddha, and they are always trying to serve and realize and attune to that conscience, that sentience, that life force, that motivation towards good. And so I'm lost in my mind again. Chaitanya. It doesn't require a lot of faith to understand that if so many thousands of years in India, a tradition that has its foundations on the study of consciousness, that's really, really important. That's a body of evidence. That's a body of research. That's a body of knowledge that can't be taken lightly. And you'll notice something with the aggressive atheist types that they almost never refer to Eastern theology and Eastern mysticism unless to try to make the case that India is a polytheistic place. There is a big difference between a non-dual pantheon and a plurality and what's the word? And a polytheistic tradition. Because in polytheism, you have competing gods. You have multiple gods. They're all gods. They're all so equally gods. But they're different people. They're different beings, and they conflict with each other. But in like, for example, in the Vaishnava tradition, which does go into detail about describing various personalities of Godhead. So there is a foundation that is called Godhead, which is essentially consciousness in a pure state, and it retains its purity. That's that level of consciousness which exists and perceives everything, but does not get diluted, does not get self-concealed, never forgets its the actual nature as pure consciousness. Then it describes that there are portions of that, small, tiny, fractional portions of that, which by dint of being like drops in the ocean have the same nature as the whole. So those sometimes, however, get confused by the energy of being, the vast multiplicity of the way we perceive and experience life. So Nityananda, Nitai, this is why I say Johnny Tai. I'm trying to bring awareness into the world of this character, of this story, of this time in history. This is supposed to be, this is not supposed to be, it is a well-known fact. It's about 500 years ago. So he's born, I said 1470, I think. And the tantrics that I know refer to Nitai as something like John the Baptist in Jesus's story. In the story of Christ, there's John the Baptist who kind of anoints Christ and kind of gets him going into a higher frequency, and it really catapults him into the mission that he really appeared for. There's a reason to study this story, which is that phenomenologically, the states of rapture and ecstasy are described in great detail in a way that is, well, you wouldn't really, someone who's done really, really heavy shamanic traditional engage like activities will read that text and have some real questions and really want to learn more, and we'll really look at that with some seriousness. And the life of Sri Chaitanya is important because to me, I see it as a description of how consciousness functions, what consciousness is and how consciousness functions. What are the levels of consciousness? What are the states of consciousness? And what is the essential nature of consciousness? So there's a lot here in this place of, you know, thinking about how all these things come together. How does the study of consciousness end in the depictions of Radha and Krishna? You know, how does the Krishna story tie into the the Chaitanya story? And all these, all of the main Hindu epics, the main Hindu stories are interlinked and interconnected. So you get references to the Ramayana in the Mahabharata, and in the Krishna Lila, it's all connected to Ram Lila through a certain type of like paying off debts. There's so many aspects in Krishna Lila that are paying back things that God did in his incarnation as Ram, and Krishna had to make up for. And then even in the Chaitanya Lila, the theme is that the theme as written by Krishnadas Kaviraj, who's considered the foremost kind of authority on Chaitanya Lila, the theme is that he is Krishna having to experience the love of his partner or his consort, his beloved Sri Radha, who he, as Krishna, had to leave really in the first few years of their being together as lovers. And so she lives out much of her life in separation from Krishna, because Krishna had to go to Mathura to kill Kamsa, and then he had to defend the Mathura Vasis for a long time from Jarasandha. Then he ended up moving to Dwarka. This Dwarka city has been located by archaeologists under the ocean in modern Dwarka area. So that's another important aspect of this, is that some of the archaeology that validates the Mahabharata has also started to become more apparent. And that's really encouraging. I think there's so much to learn about the nature of God. And I think that people who are religious need to start thinking of God as having dominion over the whole earth. So that means that he can teach everybody everywhere in different ways and different means from through different vehicles. And no religion should really think that they have a monopoly on knowledge of God. So if your tradition has knowledge of God up to a state of something like just a divine presence of light, of being, then you have to accept that other traditions also have somewhat of a more refined or crystallized or personalized understanding of God. And that's what I think is the heart of India. You see, India has a lot of mystical traditions. It has a lot of shamanic traditions. It has a genuinely very ancient and old tradition of yoga that cannot be disputed by anybody. And the yoga tradition is, by self definition, the study of consciousness. The whole religious environment of India is the study of consciousness, and it has multiple facets. There's the study of consciousness, and there's the study of energy, of matter. And those two things you have to study side by side, because one is informing you of the other and the other is informing of the other. So I'm passionate about this because all of my breakthrough psychedelic experiences really have been always in the theme of showing me more and more and more about what consciousness is. And then all of these different things come up in my consciousness that I've either even didn't know at all, or had some history studying that I could then look at and go, oh, like with more insight into that. It's like meaning of things becomes more and more clear. And certain there's a certain dropping of when you have an ego death and you merge into pure consciousness and you get an actual experiential taste of what the soul really is. I mean, you're going to come back into this world and you're going to think of looking for all the ways in which this has been revealed. And I see something really unique in the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and Sripad Nityananda Avadut, especially the Avadut, because his practical teachings, his guidance was very systematic. He actually spent 20, 30 years at 20, 30 years in Bengal, hosting Nam Sankirtan and holding Gurukul and teaching from Bhagavatam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is the main text that this mystical tradition that I am from is from, the Bhagavat Purana. And the Bhagavat Purana is sort of a quick snapshot of the lifetime, the lives, the experiences, the potentials of God. Like from him fully manifesting in all of his glory to him manifesting in, you could say, smaller and smaller portions, which reveal specific qualities about his character, about his nature. And so you could say that God's faculties, like his senses of perception, all have their own persona, their own forms and worlds that are in service to himself and enjoying their own unique flavors. The beauty of this is that realization of God is not a ending up of everything. Realization of God is an entering into reality as it is and enjoying with God, enjoying in service to God. And what service to God means can be very different from an individual basis, from one person to the next. The way God is actually asking for service, or he's not asking for service the way we think of like a slave serves his master. He's asking for more of really your love and attention. Like, people pay so much attention in this world to their own individual egoic needs. And it's like the guy who makes all of those things possible is the most ignored in most people's lives. You wouldn't even be able, you don't even know how your body runs. You're not doing all of that. It's just happening, and you're thinking like you do everything. And so most people are always in forgetfulness of God. And so what God is really looking for is like you to turn to him and be with him. And he's going to see how things are going to go. In the Vaishnava tradition, there's 5 different, you could say, mellows or relationships that you can have with God. You can have a neutral, appreciative kind of, a state of oneness with God, a state of recognition of God, this peace, like Satori. And then you get into people who genuinely, you're looking at Hanuman, who wanted to do whatever he could do for Ram. There was nothing that Ram needed that Hanuman wasn't going to try to accomplish. And he was victorious at all times because that's Hanuman. And in friendship, some are friends with God. So that means they literally experience playing, joking, running around, having a good time, getting drunk. Who wouldn't want to get drunk with God? Are you serious? It'd be hilarious. It would be so funny. And so I think the key to really encouraging faith in God is showing that there's a potential beyond fear of God in the relationship we can have with him. And the only real reason we ever actually have fear of God is because we identify with the story of our bodies. We identify with the story of our ego. So we actually genuinely think that we are doing all of this and that we are guilty of everything that happens, and that we are, or even that we are, what's the other word? The credit is ours. Like the credit of our accomplishment is actually ours. And you know, there's these passages in Chaitanya Bhagavat where Mahaprabhu is saying that, you know, a person eats whatever they eat in a day that has been ordained and allotted by me, that God ordains our daily bread. Whatever you do or don't eat, whatever you do or don't experience in a day, that is ordained by God. And there's nothing that's going to happen to you that's actually not ultimately for your own good. You know, when you think about what a life form like a you can think of dark life forms, dark entities and stuff, and you think, oh, you know, how they're so far from God, they'll never reach God, they'll never reach God. And it's actually not so. God is actually dragging them through this darkness that they've brought upon themselves. And eventually they're going to burn all of that off. They're going to make up for everything. They're part of a balancing scheme, and everyone's keeping themselves absolutely accountable. That's on a higher level of consciousness. You know, you as the conscious mind thinking you know what's going on in your life, like fully. No, you don't. There's a whole other part of you that is actually running the show. And this is what I like about either psychedelics or like near death experience types. You know, when we get like near death experience people, they often come back with these stories about seeing the bigger picture about even tragedy that happens. You know, sometimes there's these intense tragedies and you don't know what's the actual backstory. So we as a conscious mind, we judge God a lot harsher than we really understand. And we really judge ourselves that way, you know. We really judge ourselves that way. So we have like that's essentially people fear God because that's the kind of God they would be, the one you'd be afraid of. And you know that because sometimes that's the kind of person you are, you know, and sometimes that's how you feel about yourself. Like you can step outside of your own, you can cross your own boundaries, basically. You can harm yourself. That's a capacity that we all have. And so if you allow yourself to do that, you end up just going down a dark path. So God consciousness is all about returning to an awareness of not all the happenings, not all of the stuff, but actually of the pure witness. The pure witness is always present and always there and always pure, like the sky. That's the that's the essential meaning of the shunya principle, shunyata, like that consciousness is voidness. It's not nothingness. It's not emptiness, voidness. It's all encompassing. And at the same time, like radiant and crystalline pure, like water is pure. Like when you see clean, clear water, and that's why Krishna says, I am the taste of water, right? He's pointing out how he's manifested in different ways in reality that we can actually learn about him. Like we learn a lot about God from studying the sky, from studying space, from studying emptiness, because that if you don't know that that is conscious, you think it's nothing. But as soon as your consciousness has merged into it, you're going to understand it. You're going to feel intuitively its vastness, its infinity, its multiplicity of potential, infinite potentials, all in that what appears to be nothing to the mind. This is called a chintya. It's beyond the perception of the mind. So there's a whole sudge or innate or spontaneous platform of being, which is ever present. So it's here right now in the room, but we're on this channel, or this room is literally just a speck of, this universe could be like a speck of dust in the actual uh, reality of being. And so I think what I'm trying to do with this channel is I'm trying to regularly sit down and put these thoughts into a stream that people who are interested might find this as like breadcrumbs, as like is like a inspiration to go out and discover more and more and more about consciousness. I think that that is a real journey of life. I think that that's where all the passion comes from. That's where all the inspiration comes from. That's where all the knowledge comes from. And I just find it, uh, I find it very interesting. I've been obsessed with this stuff since I was like 16. I've really somehow chosen to nerd out on, not nerd out, but go really deep into something that most people get a surface introduction to and then kind of assume that that's all there is to it, or don't know how to enter into the experiential part of it. Like it just becomes theoretical. Everyone's talking about all these, you decide dissecting so much information and trying to come to these conclusions and set it out in such a way, but you don't even understand the conclusion. There's a reason why the conclusion is arrived to by these sages, but most people miss it because a the actual the actual revelation is so obvious that most people's mind wants to deny it. Like that your own consciousness is self-manifest Brahman. Most people have not fully accepted in themselves. They've not been graced with a real introduction to themselves. And it's because of that often that in all religious traditions you have this thing. I mean, like people can practice a religion their whole life and still be a horrible person, still cause harm onto others without really regard, still act in ways that are just condemnable. It seems like there's no change happening by practicing that religion. But my opinion is that that happens because people, though they profess to practice a religion, you can't really practice a religion unless you've you can't genuinely practice a religion unless you've had an experience which actually took you beyond yourself and made that something real. Because belief doesn't carry you very far in real life decisions. Most people use rational, logical, evidence-based, concrete things to try to make decisions. I mean, it's probably actually, if you analyze this psychologically, it's probably less than common. But that's the assumption we all make, is that people are trying to be rational and not just go on belief. And belief, why belief isn't very good without experience, without experiences, without it's like trust. You Trust and belief are really intertwined. If I say I believe I can trust you and then not you break my trust, now I don't believe I can trust you. I know I cannot. Or at least I know that we have a lot of work to do to build that trust. So a lot of people have belief in God, and there's this thing happening where they feel like God's letting them down all the time. So they're putting their stock in God's not there. But Shraddha, genuine Shraddha, is when a person comes into this place where they see, they witness, they feel, they acknowledge, they embrace the wisdom that God is always for them. God is always there for them. And that actually changes a person, because you go from being a victim, weak, helpless, poor, destitute, miserable, depressed, whatever, to having like literally your creator, your father, who you are a part and parcel of, owns everything, is everything, controls everything, and he's got your back. There's nobody in the world that could oppose you if you have God on your side. It's the whole story of the Mahabharata. These 5 brothers who had friendship with God when he walked on this earth as Krishna. 5 brothers who were best friends with Krishna overthrew the entire empire of the Kurus. They had a smaller army. They depended on the relationship with Krishna, with the Yadu dynasty, but the Yadu dynasty ended up fighting. Part of the Yadu dynasty ended up fighting on the Kuru side of the Mahabharata war. So the Mahabharata war is something I think that we have to do a lot to learn more about the Mahabharata. This is the history of India. This is what all Indians know, the story of the Mahabharata. It is the psychology. This is like the story underpinning India, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And of course, local regions will have the story of their saints and the yogis and the various local regional stories. Temples all have their histories. So India is a place where you can really see the interaction people have with supernatural beings, with deities, with levels and stages of God. And then sometimes God literally makes himself manifest, makes himself known to the people. That happens in India and in the stories of India. There are all these sages that tell these stories. It's a passed down oral tradition for who knows how long. And the conversations going on in the West around religion and around consciousness and metaphysics, and there's not a lot of the Indian speakers like Sadhguru or Deepak, or I don't know. I don't listen to many people now, because most people take it to an impersonal place. They take it to a place that denies the existence even of all these manifest specific forms of God. Not just I'm God, you're God, we're all God, let's do whatever we want. It's actually no. There's on a level we're all one with God, and then God has his own self, and he does stuff all the time. That's the story of man. That's what life on earth is. That's the whole history of human beings. That's what is in the Indian sacred texts. That's part of what they're describing. And those texts go into describing, the shape of the cosmos. They go into astrology, astronomy, palmistry. It's all those texts are just all kinds of esoteric, occult, natural sciences, things that we become afraid of in the West. You see all this occultic symbolism that the Western pop stars and stuff use, and it's really just to make people afraid and draw some energy out of that intense fear. Like, am I supposed to like this? Is this wrong? But it's a good song, and I like this artist for so long, so whatever, we'll go along with it. But not knowing that there's energy going on there. There's a presence of ideas, of thoughts, of associated meaning. And so there's drawing on an energy. Most people don't know how to defend themselves from that kind of thing. And so, what a tradition like Lord Nityananda has passed down holds is all of the various methods and stages and stories, songs and stories that help you understand God to the fullest extent and help you fall in love with God, really. Not staying on a platform of fear. So Nityananda, Lord Nityananda, or Nityananda the Avadut, he's like my ishta, my main form or aspect of Godhead that I relate to. He is considered by the Vaishnava tradition the manifest human form of Balaram. That's the brother of Krishna in the Krishna Leela or Krishna story, the Krishna history. For Vaishnavas, we see Krishna as a historical figure because the Mahabharata to the whole Indian tradition, the whole Hindu tradition is a history. It's not supposed to be taken as just allegories. Although the interesting thing about the way God tells stories is that he makes histories allegorical, which is really, I find that very interesting. So you'll see this in the way people are named and the way the stories goes, that it's simultaneously meant to be a depiction of something that actually happened and an explanation of how things work within consciousness, how consciousness functions, and various faculties and all the various potentialities of consciousness take on their own character, take on their own form, take on their own life of they have a life of their own. Everything within God is an individual of its own being. God is non-dual and he's an infinity paradox. So the more you study God, the more and get in contact with God and get in like to a place where you actually, there's like meditations that you can do where you're sitting there and you're just distracted and or you're focused, but it's like still kind of quiet. It's low key, nothing's going on. Nothing beyond you is there. It's just you and your thoughts, And then other times spontaneously energies can flow. There's all kinds of experiences that can happen. You can have visions, you can have vibrational frequency kind of stuff. You can hear things, you can slip into slightly alternate dimensions or realities, and sometimes you feel the presence of higher beings like angels or jinn or naga or gandharvas, or even higher into various rishis and saints that have been before but actually continue to exist on like the transcendent plane. And sometimes it feels like it's God, and he makes you think of him in certain ways that are spontaneous and blissful. And what can happen is, at a low degree, you might have a welling up of emotion and tears might flow, and that alone can be very, very rewarding, very, very satisfying to the heart, to the soul. And then sometimes it can be more. Like if you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, if you read that text that I'm talking about throughout this, because that text is actually written by disciples and associates of Nityananda the Avadut. So it's an interesting thing that a tantric yogi would have composed. It's an interesting story that would become the central story of the Chaitanya Vaishnava tradition, culminating in understanding the secret love play of the male and female aspects of being in the transcendent groves of Golok Vrindavan, which we are all pulled towards by the force of love and attraction, and to eventually ascend into what we've always been. That platform is, we've always been there, but in the mind, in the experience of a world, of the waking state of consciousness, some of us go to sleep there and wake up here and live countless infinite lifetimes of forgetfulness within this small portion of consciousness that we call it jiva, to hopefully one day wake back up to the truth of reality. Just like in the Matrix, the problem with the Matrix was they made it that when you wake up from the Matrix, shit's way worse than when you were asleep in the Matrix. But in the reality of the yoga tradition, of the whole, it's not the reality of the yoga tradition. I believe that every religion points to this transcendent plane. So I'm going to say for me, it feels very much, and based on my experience, it feels very much like reality. And this world feels very much like perceptual reality based on my individual story and our collective individual stories having to play themselves out on a plane like this, which gives everyone the free will to forget, to not deal with reality. That's illusion. That's what the Myosphere is. That's what the psychedelics help us snap out of, but can also, if you don't have the right attitude, if you don't have the right guidance, if you don't have the right protection, it can send you just into more confusion. Because the more you look into Maya, the more it manifests whatever you want to see. And you're not going to end up getting to the bottom of it because you're still looking out, not looking in. And one of the things that I learned from DMT was don't really pay attention to don't look at all of it really tune into yourself. And when you do that, there's a whole nother level of what that space is. And that's a platform in which you can interact with some of the various goddesses who are in the pantheon of the tantric mystical tradition. So these meditational places that we can go to in the mind, they're also the stations where certain deities reside. And going to these deities for blessings, we move higher and higher and higher until we actually come to the culminating point of God consciousness, which is a very, 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 very intensely magnified form of love of God. That's the essential nature of the inner, the most secret place of God, the most innermost aspect of Him is love. And it has a maximum point. And in the Vaishnava tradition that I'm from, it's called Mahabhav, or the great ecstasy, the great state. And that is the actual, you could say, according to all of these traditions, that state of being is not only a state of being in which one is in reality, but also it's the highest form. It's the goal of life. It's the culminating goal of life is to enter into that. And that takes on all the various, it's not an end point. It's not an end point. It's not there's no end. That's the thing that people don't understand about consciousness, is that there's no beginning to it. There's no end to it. It's infinite. It's spread everywhere in everything. And it's what makes everything happen. It is everything. Sri Chaitanya. So that's the revelation of Sripad Nityananda the Avadut. That's what I've been trying to discover more and more about, both through going deep into my Vaishnava tradition and also going into yoga and the shamanic psychedelic. I believe deeply in psilocybin, and I've really, really enjoyed witnessing the world come to understand and respect psilocybin. And I think that those who are in spiritual traditions really need to take it seriously as a spiritual guide, as a method that actually can accelerate moving past some of the initial blocks to faith, because we have a lot of past residue and a lot of resentment for being and a lot of pain that prevents us from actually just acknowledging the existence of the soul and of God. And I think that is the reason our world is teetering on like doomsday. In every single place you seem to see it getting more and more intense, and people are losing touch with reality through technology, which is an externalized another layer of the Myosphere. Really, you're just going another layer deeper. People are going to be in the metaverse with projected worlds, which is already the way it works. Like, you're already projecting this world. This world is already a hologram, but now you're going to go into another hologram created by somebody else. That's a world where you aren't part and parcel of the creator. You're the food. You're the source of sustenance for those creators. And so you really need to be careful that you are grounding with earth, because earth and the Lord have a long, long, long relationship, and they are connected. Just because the Lord is transcendental does not mean that this earth is insignificant to him. The whole history of the Vedic tradition, of the Vaishnava tradition, of the Yoga, Hindustan, whatever, however you want to put it, the whole tradition of India is founded on an acknowledgement of the, you could almost say, eternality of earth, and that God has a relationship with earth. One of my friends is an Avadhut yogi. He says that, when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, where did the animals go? Did they just stay? So the animals and the trees and the forest and everything, they're still in Eden. Everything in nature is still perfectly according to nature. That's God in a manifest way, in a way you can see. The Bhagavatam says that one should first study the universe, the Vishvarupa, the form of the world itself, because for you, where else is God? And if you study the world, you're going to understand that it's life and the world and earth, though seemingly separate, are always in relationship with one another. So God is not indifferent to the goings on in earth, but also God is not different from you. So if you're wielding your hand to smite others, then you can be sure that that's what's happening to you. And so if you actually turn to good, you actually get into a path of faith, if you actually make contact with God, you're automatically going to improve in so many different ways in your character, in your behavior, in your treatment, and respect for others. And that is what's actually lacking so deeply in the world today. Is genuine respect for other living entities, for other people. And those people who want to promote ideologies which profess to be all about helping marginalized classes, if they do so in a way that actually promotes hate, which is what we're seeing today, they're intentionally doing that to create more suffering, because they're that aspect of being. They're the malevolence of being that wants to see others suffer. And so they're going to suffer. And the only way out of that cycle is to enter into goodness, enter into seeing the good in others, enter into, you have an opposition, you have people you disagree with, but you have to see that they're entitled to their opinion, they're entitled to their view, they're entitled to their world. They're in their own relationship with God. They are allowed to see God the way God wants them to see him. They're allowed to relate with God the way God wants them to relate with him. And because he's in control of everything, he's in control of the way they're doing that. And there's no need for anybody to interfere in other people's lives, unless it is to defend from someone interfering in other people's lives. That's how like you have righteous war. Righteous war is all about defending the the innocent from the malice or greed of some other person who is willing to kill innocent women, children, and men for resources or for power or for whatever it is. people who are actually of real genuine faith, they create peace. They create peace. They don't create war. Everybody's going like, the whole media is drumming up war, 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 as if anything about the current war is actually good or about anything good. There's a long history of countries doing harm without any consequence for profit. And that's the force of evil. You have the force of evil in the world, and a lot of people, they knowingly or unknowingly support that. A lot of people today, unknowingly, due to ignorance, support and promote the doctrines, the images, the notions, the ideologies of genuine evil. And they do so in the guise of goodness, in the guise of religions, in the guise of charities, in the guise of social organizations, and what's the word for that? Like, I can't remember the word. It's there. It's not there. Anyway, I've been going for 56 minutes. I'm going to do a lot more on studying. I want to do some discussing some of the cool texts that I've been reading through and trying to have translated over the years that are like controversial, but kind of reveal some stuff that's really important. I'm going to get into talking about like brahmacharya or sexual mastery, sexual celibacy, but also celibacy within relationships and within sexual activity. So there's a whole stream of important information around how the body actually can enhance its own consciousness through all the tools of breath, of body, of mind, of speech. We're going to talk about mantras a lot. We're going to talk about there's a whole bunch of stuff here that I want to talk about. And I realized that if I need to have some way to easily transmit a lot of this stuff to my son as he grows, so that there'll be a body of work for him to learn about the things I've done in my life, the things I've learned about in my life. And I hope that he is able to take all of that and go way further than me and see way more than I have and realize deeper and deeper states. And I feel like he is already such a wonderful little man. I can't believe it. A year into being this little boy's dad, and I am just so in love. That is the blessing of God. I feel like the richest man in the world, even though I am not, but I am. We can be rich in our experience and rich in our love and rich in our family and rich with the Lord, with God. In Jesus' name, in Krishna's name, in Allah's name, in Buddha's name, in Krishna's name, in everyone's name who is actually the Lord. Not all those fakers, not all those cheaters, not all those fake gurus and fake yogis who learned how to trick innocent people into giving them lots of money. Lots and lots of money. Not that kind of thing. I'm talking about people anywhere and everywhere who have made contact with reality and come back to sing of its glories. This is Tremors from the Heart. I hope you follow this channel. You can like this video if you enjoyed it. I would love to hear comments or corrections or anything. Just leave it in the comment section. Anything else, Ani? We should say Jai Nitai. Jai Nitai, Jai Nityananda, the Avadut. Gorpranim's coming up soon. Raise some awareness. The life of Sri Chaitanya, life as it is.